I was just very blessed to speak with Glenn Beck on his show this morning about Coca-Cola's training telling employees to be less white. And Glenn asked, what can just average everyday people do when this kind of stuff invades their workplace? Well, the first answer is you've got to find it within yourself to speak up if you have the ability to. And I want to acknowledge that when you speak up against this type of training in your workplace, most commonly, you're going to get backlash from it. It could even cost you your job. And so I do want to acknowledge that not everyone is in a position to be able to speak up when this type of training comes and knocks on their door. However, if you can, you have got to speak up. You've got to stop whispering in the kitchen with your coworkers about how much you all hate the training and then still going through and completing it anyway, because I promise you there are more people that agree with you than don't. But the other thing you can do is to campaign to get it banned on a state level. Now, many of you know this is actually something I am working on in New Hampshire. Last week, I testified in the New Hampshire House of Representatives for a bill called HB 544 that would effectively eliminate critical race theory training in all state agencies and in all state contractors. So I'm working on that in New Hampshire right now. But New Hampshire is not the only state that's introduced it. West Virginia has followed suit. And I'm very excited to see West Virginia. And actually, I have emails from a couple state representatives in different states in my inbox right now that are thinking about doing the same thing. Listen, Joe Biden rescinded Donald Trump's executive order on day one that outlawed this type of training in the federal government and in all federal government contractors. So that's completely fair game again. And frankly, we know it's already started up again. But you can still fight back and get it banned on a state level. Now, this has not been successful in any state in the country so far. I am very, very hopeful and optimistic that New Hampshire will be the first, but some state's going to do it. And I think once one state does it, the dominoes are going to fall from there. So let's take a look at this bill that was introduced in the West Virginia legislature, House Bill 2595. A bill to amend the Code of West Virginia, 1931, as amended by adding thereto a new section, blah, 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 designed to, I'm trying to find a good place to start reading where it's not all legalese and like all crazy. All relating to prohibiting discriminatory, divisive acts in the workplace, and adding to the definition of the Human Rights Act provided the teaching of divisive acts in West Virginia schools and prohibiting state funding to agencies who promote divisive acts. And then we go into the bill. It shall be the policy of the state of West Virginia not to promote race or sex stereotyping or scapegoating in the workforce and not to allow grant funds to be used for these purposes. In addition, state contractors will not be permitted to inculcate such views in their employees. For the purpose of definition, the phrase divisive concepts means concepts that one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. 2, the United States is fundamentally racist or sexist. 3, an individual by virtue of his or her race or sex is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. 4, an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly because of his or her race or sex. 5, members of one race or sex cannot and should not attempt to treat others without respect to their race or sex. 6, an individual's moral character is necessarily determined by his or her race or sex. 7, an individual by virtue of his or her race or sex bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex. 8, any individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of his or her race or sex. 9, meritocracy or traits such as hard work ethic are racist or sexist or were created by a particular race to oppress another race. The term and lastly, the term divisive concepts also includes any other form of race or sex stereotyping or any other form of race or sex scapegoating. And to add some more clarity to those definitions, Race or sex stereotyping means ascribing character traits, values, morals, and ethical codes, privileges, status, or belief to a race or sex or to an individual because of his or her race or sex. And race or sex scapegoating means assigning fault, blame, or bias to a race or sex or to members of a race or sex because of their race or sex. It summarily encompasses any claim that consciously or unconsciously, by virtue of his or her race or sex, members of any race are inherently racist or are inherently inclined to oppress others, or that members of a sex are inherently sexist or inclined to repress others. The curriculum promoting decisive acts prohibited. It shall be the policy of the State Board of Education of West Virginia not to promote race or sex stereotyping or scapegoating in schools, and not to allow schools to use curriculum that promotes divisive acts. And then it defines what those divisive acts are again. Monies to agencies who promote divisive acts prohibited. It shall be the policy of the state of West Virginia to prohibit state funding for state agencies who promote race or sex stereotyping or scapegoating, and it shall be prohibited for any state funding to go towards West Virginia agencies who promote divisive acts. So this is a really simple bill. And I suspect in the state of West Virginia, this bill is going to have a lot of support. I don't know that for sure. I have reached out to the sponsors of the bill. Hopefully they reach back to me. Guys, I'm happy to help you try to pass this type of bill. Just because I live in New Hampshire doesn't mean New Hampshire is the only playground that I have to play in. Of course, I want to see New Hampshire do it first, just so we have bragging rights. But I will say that the bill in West Virginia actually goes further than the New Hampshire bill, because the New Hampshire bill does not specify stuff around curriculum. It more so would include stuff around state money being spent on teacher education, but it doesn't actually specify that it would be prohibited from being in the classroom. So this West Virginia bill does go a little bit further than the one in New Hampshire, which I think is just great. I think, listen, if we can only get baby steps towards this, if we can only get a little bit of it banned, maybe just in state agencies rather than state contractors, of course, I want the whole shebang, but even a baby step is better than nothing. But the further that you can go in your state, the more Republican support that you have in it, the better it's going to be. And I'm going to be honest, in New Hampshire, I don't have a question about the Democrats. The Democrats are going to vote against the bill in New Hampshire no matter what. We already know that. My concern right now is actually that the Republicans in the State House are not going to remember that they are Republicans. And mark my words, to any Republicans in New Hampshire that is thinking about voting against HB 544, trust me, I will make it my personal mission to make sure you lose your seat. Because if you are not going to act like a Republican, then you are not useful in the State House. Okay, let's just be very clear. I want to help you. I want to give you talking points. I want to help you understand what this is and why it's so incredibly dangerous. But if you don't want to play ball and you don't want to act like a Republican, then I will become your absolute worst nightmare. You can mark my words on that. So I hope that we're going to start seeing more of these bills pop up in different state legislatures. I know there are a couple other states that James Lindsay was really trying to hammer home on. But again, I think once we get one, I think the dominoes are just going to fall from there. So we need some state legislators to be brave, to stand up. And if you need an average everyday people, you need to reach out to your representatives. You need to let them know that you support this type of legislation. If you aren't going to stand up and do that very simple act, then you can't complain when you have to go into your work environment and get a training that says, be less white. Every single person has a role to play here. You have to speak up. You might be scared to speak up. I understand that. In New Hampshire, the person that actually was the impetus for this bill being introduced is still anonymous because he needed to remain anonymous in order to keep his job. You can tell your state legislatures to keep you anonymous, but still communicate with them in private about your support for this bill, and that's still going to make a difference. So if you can't send an email to your representative, dude, you're not useful in this fight either. Everyone needs to get off their butt and to start speaking up. And if we aren't going to do that, You can post all the polar bear memes you want saying that Coke said to be less white, but you aren't fighting back either. Everyone has got to participate. Go onto your state website, find your representatives, reach out to them, and tell them you want similar bills like this introduced in your state. It is the bare minimum bar to entry, and if you aren't going to do that, you don't get to complain, so far as I'm concerned. All right, folks, if you enjoyed this video, I do content almost every single day of the week around news, politics, culture, a lot of critical race theory stuff, and ragging on that because it is my personal mission to kill this absurd ideology until it's good and dead and gone. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll consider subscribing, turning on notifications, leaving a comment, all that good stuff. That's all I've got for right now. I'll see you soon.